Hello, hi everyone. I'm Krishna, Programming Manager at the Map Academy, and I'm very thrilled to have you all here. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday evening. Just to let you know in advance, we are recording the session. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, welcome to Map Academy Live. A little bit about us. The Map Academy is an open access digital resource with a focus on art and cultural histories. Our offerings include an extensive encyclopedia of art. We have a few online courses, image-led essays and stories, grants, and other special projects, including curatorial work. Through these, we encourage knowledge building and engagement with the visual arts in the region. You can follow us on Instagram and sign up for our newsletters via the website, and all the links are there on the chat. This event is part of our Map Academy live program where we host expert-led talks at the intersection of art, research, and practice. Today, we have with us curator and researcher Mansi S Rao. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mansi. Mansi is the collection curator at the South Asia Collection in Norwich, UK. Her research and curatorial practice focuses on bridging the gap between representation of craft objects in repositories abroad and their socio-cultural significance to the communities that make and use them. Mansi was previously a senior research associate at the DICRC, CEPT University in India. She has a degree in architecture and a master's in museums, heritage, and material culture studies from SOAS, University of London. She was awarded the Chevening Scholarship and the Charles Wallace India Trust and Simon Digby Charitable Trust Scholarship to conduct research in the UK. And Mansi is also an advisor for the Inade Silva Foundation in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much. So before I hand it over to you, Mansi, I'd just like to inform all of you that the talk will be followed by a Q&A. So in case you have any questions for the speaker, you can drop them in the chat and we'll open up the floor for discussion. And a quick housekeeping notes, if all of you could keep your mics on mute and your cameras off for now, just so that we have a smooth experience. You can turn them back on once we are in the Q&A. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Mansi.
Thank you so much, Krishna. Good evening to all of you. And thank you so much for being here today. I've been an ardent admirer of Map Academy's work ever since they've started, and it really is a privilege to be able to present my work on this platform today. My talk today will focus on the experiences from an 8-year-long research project that we undertook. I'm just going to share my screen. Is that all okay, Krishna?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So my talk today focuses on a project that we undertook over 8 years, between 2015 to 2022, 23. And the project was called the Vernacular Furniture of Northwest India. And it was undertaken as a collaborative project between the South Asia Collection in Norwich, where I work now, and my former workplace, which is the Design Innovation and Craft Resource Center at CEPT University in Ahmedabad. To begin talking about the project, I really need to give an introduction to the South Asia Collection. The South Asia Collection in Norwich, in the United Kingdom, is a museum and research center that is managed by the South Asian Decorative Arts and Crafts Collection Trust, a UK-based charity, whose objective is to record, conserve, and promote the arts, crafts, and cultures of South Asia and Southeast Asia. The trust was founded by our trustees, Dr. Philip and Jeannie Millward, on the basis of their own private collection of art, textiles, everyday objects, furniture, and a diverse selection of craft objects that they collected during their travels in South Asia and Southeast Asia, starting in 1979. Their work at the time involved working with craft communities and sourcing craft objects directly from these communities for their retail business here in Norwich. Their retail business now serves as our museum shop. with a keen interest in craft traditions, Philip and Jeannie built up a gradual collection of such objects. And in about 2006, they had close to about 3,500 items in this collection that they had put together. They were really interested in doing something with the collection rather than just holding on to it. So, two formal assessments were carried out of the collection here in the UK. One by a team at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford in the UK, and another assessment was carried out by a team of experts from the British Museum and the University of East Anglia here in Norwich. And both assessments concluded that this collection was quite unique and was a preeminent collection in the UK. And following this, Philip and Jeannie decided to sort of safeguard the collection, and they set up the trust in 2010 to make it accessible as a resource for sort of knowledge development and dissemination of knowledge around living traditions of South and Southeast Asia. Today, we have a growing collection of over 10,000 items. The Trust looks after the collection, and we are a public-facing museum with programming of exhibitions and events and talks. And we also are a research center where we undertake projects related to the collection that we can share with the rest of the world. So, part of the 10,000 items that we have in the collection is a significant collection of furniture from South and Southeast Asia. And around 250 of these furniture pieces and related objects come from Northwest India, making this one of the most significant collections of furniture, at least in the UK. So these examples of furniture were mostly acquired in the 80s and 90s, primarily from dealers trading secondhand furniture in India. One might ask how these furniture pieces end up in collections like ours. Essentially, families adapting to new lifestyles, moving to newer homes, and with different aspirations than their previous generations, sort of are faced with the dilemma of holding on to material culture or letting go. And when the latter happens, these objects, which have a certain monetary value, move into trade markets where they're regarded to be sold off for other purposes. Often we find them in sort of repurposed in sort of heritage hotel contexts, or to sort of dress up these sort of sites, and also they end up in the export handicraft trade as well. This is something I won't get into at the moment, but this complex route does leave these objects not just out of context, but also sort of distances them away from the stories that they hold and the lives that they have been part of previously. When the collection was being put together, our founders were also keenly interested in recording these stories associated with the objects. So luckily for us, even before the initiative to set up a museum was put in place, Philip and Jeannie always maintained records of where these objects were acquired from and what their stories were. And so we have a good sort of history of these objects that we hold in the collection. And during their journeys, what they realized was a lot of furniture pieces lacked these stories. There were not even names that they could sort of identify them with, or they were being misrepresented in more than one way. So since the time they started putting this collection of furniture together, they were interested in researching these objects for what they truly were. So over the years, they funded an undergraduate research project at the University of East Anglia and on the subject. And even this study sort of led them to believe that further research had to be done on these objects. So in 2014, Philip and Jeannie got in touch with Professor Jay Thakkar, who is a senior associate professor at the Faculty of Design at CEPT University. He has a background in wood carving in traditional architecture across Northwest India. And he was invited to study some of the architectural pieces that we have in the collection here. And on this trip, Philip and Jeannie and Jay looked at also the furniture from Northwest India in the collection. And Jay was also then the executive director for the Design Innovation and Craft Resource Center in Ahmedabad at CEPT University, where the center was undertaking several research projects relating to craft traditions, and we were working with grassroots communities and craft communities on various types of documentation projects and education projects. Since we already had access to a lot of grassroots methods of working, it was established that perhaps we could have a go at researching some of the furniture, because by this point it was established that it needed someone on ground to sort of look at what these furniture pieces were. Mm. So it was agreed that we would set up a project. Philip and Jeannie visited us in Ahmedabad, and this sort of led to the beginnings of the project. So this project really began with a museological need for researching and representing objects that we have in the collection. However, it sort of grew into its full form only after it started, and once we started undertaking fieldwork on the project. So I'll quickly jump into this project that was a collaboration between the South Asian Decorative Arts and Crafts Collection Trust and the Design Innovation and Craft Resource Center at CEPT University. The project was conducted between 2015 to 2022 in sort of 3 phases, primarily for ease of logistical management. Phase 1 was in Gujarat, phase 2 was in Rajasthan, and phase 3 was in Punjab and Haryana. And of course, this project involved a huge team. I'm only a voice today for the collective experiences of this entire team. We were 5 principal researchers on the project and a huge team of research assistants, IT specialists, artists, designers, including the museum team here in Norwich, who worked on various aspects of the project. We also had involvement of the university students at CEPT at various stages of the project. And like I said, the talk today really focuses on the collective experiences of this wonderful team who I've had the privilege of working with. So when we started off on the project, much like everybody else, we looked at what previous research existed on the subject. We obviously had all the knowledge that had been handed down to us from Philip and Jeannie and the team at the museum about work that had been undertaken here. But we were looking for secondary research sources as a way to sort of give us a guiding path. And to our surprise, we barely found too much material on the subject. There were a few locally specific studies. For example, Professor Jyotindra Jain, who was again quite instrumental in guiding us on this project, had worked on a similar project for the Sanskriti Museum in Ahmedabad. This was in the 70s, though, and focused on furniture from Kutch and Gujarat. And there's also books like Mud, Mirror, and Thread, where some of the mud-based furniture are sort of briefly mentioned. And there's also the arts of Kutch and folk art and culture of Gujarat, which is the guidebook that Jyotindra Jain wrote. So there's that as well. But what we realized was that there was a lack of a comprehensive study on furniture in the context of India. And any historical material that we looked at made no references to the sort of everyday furniture that we were looking at. So we knew that it definitely was going to be a primary research-based project at this stage. And we obviously needed some starting points. So what we decided to do was to undertake a pilot study in Ahmedabad and the sort of surrounding regions. What we did was we put together a toolkit which consisted of images from the collection here in Norwich and some of the object history forms that we had access to. And we set off talking to people if they knew anything about these sort of furniture types, etc. And this really served as a visual guide to sort of start conversations around the types of furniture that we were looking at, but it really still didn't lead us to anywhere concrete. But what it did lead us to was some learnings, initial learnings that helped us develop a methodology for the project, because we really needed to look at developing a bespoke methodology for a project like this when these sort of furniture types hadn't been studied before. So, because these early learnings were so instrumental in shaping the methodology of the project, I'm going to quickly run us through some of the challenges or what I like to call as starting troubles that we had. When we did the pilot study in Ahmedabad and surrounding areas, we obviously realized quite early on that to study furniture, we really have to be invited into people's personal spaces. Unlike sort of looking at architecture, which you can do walking along the streets, we really had to be invited into their homes. We had to look at objects in their personal spaces where people ate, slept, and prayed. How we address this, I'll come to in a minute. The second aspect was also in the initial days when we set out to look at districts for our pilot study, we realized that administrative boundaries obviously serve no purpose in a project like this, because boundaries are fluid, the way people move are fluid, and sort of culture and traditions are fluid across these administrative boundaries. So an initial literature study on the landscapes and geography of the places led us to put down another premise for the project, which was to look at cultural regions as a way to root these furniture pieces in place, as opposed to sort of administrative boundaries, even though we were looking at the states as our primary means of working out the phases. And the third one is is something related to sort of language and terminology. So quite early on, we developed a chart to look at and categorize and classify some of these furniture types. And this chart really sort of looked at putting the furniture pieces that we were identifying under categories of bed and chairs and tables, in a way pointing us to our own sort of inherited notions of what furniture really means. And we were clearly going in the wrong direction, because none of these furniture pieces that we were recording on this pilot study fell into these categories of beds and tables and chairs. So we had to rethink what furniture really meant, what these everyday furniture pieces meant. And even the most sort of ubiquitous furniture piece, the charpai, was being referred to by different names like Dolio and Khatlo and Khatli and Dhorni. And at the outset, there was no sort of evident way to distinguish what these differences in names pointed to. So, which brings us to the third premise that we laid out for the project, that we had to pay a huge amount of attention to local language and the nuances of language and dialects and what these terminologies meant in the context of furniture. And while we were carrying out this sort of linguistic analysis, we also stumbled across many people telling us about how in most of these Northwest Indian regions, people have the saying, what they call a kehwat in Gujarat, which says "Bar game boli badle base ane pani," which means every 12 villages the language changes, and so does the attire that one wears and the taste of water. And the second one here is a similar saying in Haryana. So across Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab, and Haryana, we started encountering these sort of sayings where there was going to be diversity and these changes in diversity across the regions. So we were quite excited to see what this would bring to light. So here's the table that I was talking about, that this little chart of inherited notions of categories, which we had to shed as we were moving along. So this really formed a premise for the methodology of the project. And the methodology of the project really was divided into 4 stages based on this pilot study. We obviously had to identify and locate where these furniture pieces were. We had to understand what they were used for, who made them, what were these associations that these objects had with people and their own lives. And we also had to obviously make a link with the collection here, because that's where the project began, with the museological need to contextualize the collection. So these were the 4 sort of main areas that we were looking at for study. Now, once we got into looking at how to identify and locate these furniture pieces, we had to do a bit of pre-field research before we would go off for field work. And this often involved essentially putting together a list of places where we might find these furniture pieces. So we looked at residences, we looked at institutions, we looked at various museums and public spaces and religious spaces. But beyond that, how would one access these spaces? Which brings me back to the first problem of trust building that I raised. So we had to come up with a unique method to really be able to access people's homes. So what we ended up doing was we would talk to our first set of contacts. So it could be our friends, it could be our family, it could be people studying at the university, anyone we had access to who might have furniture like these at home. And those set of contacts would further then lead us to a second set of contacts who would be their friends and their contacts and other scholars and other researchers who would be working in the areas. So in a way, this sort of snowballed into building this huge network of connections with people, all through one or the other way of personally knowing someone. And through this process, over the course of the project, we met close to about 4,100 people. This included craftspeople, scholars, people who were makers of furniture and people who were users of furniture. So this is how we were really able to be welcomed into people's homes. So this got to us the idea of locating furniture. And once we were able to access these furniture pieces, we obviously had to find a way to record them. So we developed a mapping form at the center, which involved really sort of object-specific information mapping form with also the ability to record a GPS location, which would then help us map these pieces onto a little map as well. So we were recording information like what the object was called, where it was located, including the village names, the district states, and also sort of information about crafting and materials and techniques. And in this process, we were able to visit close to about 429 places across Northwest India. And we sort of identified and recorded close to 7,886 pieces across Northwest India. So that sort of roughly amounts to 2,000 pieces in every state that we visited. And further, these pieces were obviously we were trying to look at how these pieces would be identified and regarded, and which takes me back to the inherited notions of categories. Even though we sort of understood the problematics of categories, we had to ensure that there was a way to identify these pieces of furniture for what they were really called. So after having collected information on these 7,800 odd furniture pieces, we then went through a whole sort of process of analysis. We studied sort of characteristics of these pieces, what these features were, what they were used for, what they were called, because each piece of furniture was called different names based on dialects in each of the different regions as well. So after a huge process of analysis, we were able to group them under 167 types of furniture. So having started from sort of beds and tables, we moved to looking at all local names for these different furniture types and related objects. And the other thing we realized while we were studying these pieces of furniture was also that they're sort of mostly use based. So we categorized or further grouped them under furniture that were meant for seating, furniture that were meant for sleeping, and furniture for storage, and surfaces that could be used for placing a number of things. And we also looked at a fifth group of objects, which we called Vastu, because a lot of everyday objects were also used in conjunction with these furniture pieces. So those we included as part of the study as well. So one of the biggest wins of our project has been to look at ways of identifying these furniture pieces beyond these inherited notions of what furniture really means. Having looked at Having identified and looked at locating these furniture types, we really had to get into understanding what these furniture pieces were. So we relied mainly on two main disciplines, although not limited to it. We looked at anthropological aspects of studying furniture pieces, which involved understanding context, community life around it, ritual uses, food and belief systems, gender and social structures that shape these furniture pieces and people's lives as well. And then the second approach that we took was to look at ideas of design, which also looked at materials, techniques, preparing drawings, etc. So the first component of our study in this section was to record stories, which involved an extensive oral history methodology. We spoke to people trying to understand what their associations with these objects were, for which we developed some detailed object-specific forms that we were filling as we went along. We also used extensive writing of field notes. We were looking at photography as a medium to record these objects in situ. And some of these stories itself, we were looking at both audiovisual recordings as well. And these sort of stories didn't really just happen within the four walls of homes. Sometimes we were traveling on the train and people would ask us where we were off to, and that led to conversations and sparked more knowledge development. Sometimes just sat around in the courtyards of people's homes, and sometimes invited into homes for sort of delicious meals as well. So these stories sort of unfolded over various contexts, various scenarios, and various circumstances as well. What I would like to do at this point is to take a pause with the methodology and jump into some of these stories associated with the furniture that we were recording. And these really are sort of key highlights. They don't really sum up everything that we have been able to record, but just for the sake of today's talk, I've picked out some that really left a lasting impression on the team and particularly for myself too. The first one that I want to talk about is what I like to call furniture for water. Across Northwest India, when we were traveling, it was quite common to obviously be offered water as soon as we went into people's homes, because in these parts of India, it is considered a sign of hospitality. And we noticed as we used to enter people's homes, we would find these little wall niches with water pots right at the entrance. So often these niches with water pots were meant for people to wash their feet or wash their hands as they were entering the home. So these two images that you look at here, the one on the left is an image at the entrance of the house, much lower in height. And the one on the right that you see is actually another wall niche at the entrance wall. So even with these niches, they were meant for different purposes. So the one right at the entrance would be for washing your feet and your hands, and the one as soon as you are closer to the door of the house would be for drinking. So there were these little architectural features that pointed towards storage of water. But as we traveled along further, we also started noticing actual objects that were designed and made for the storage of water pitchers and water pots. This piece here is particularly called a gharuchi in Rajasthan. And the word gharuchi literally means for a pot. And this was often a trestle-shaped structure, which also had sort of recesses around on the top here to be able to hold the shape of the pot in a stable manner. And there would be small little details with animal carvings as design elements that would be added into it. Now, if one were to think this was the only form of furniture available for storage of furniture, we moved into southern Rajasthan, where elaborate receptacles or elaborate sort of inbuilt storage spaces were created for the storage of water. And you begin to see that this is essentially because of the cultural sensitivity towards water, given the scarcity of water around the region there. So in Dungarpur in Rajasthan, and primarily in the Wagad region in southern Rajasthan, these sort of features, these sort of storage spaces were called paniara. And they always were the first thing you would encounter as soon as you entered into the home. And if you look at this image in detail, you've got an elaborate system there with a shelf meant for your tumblers that you use for drinking water and several stacking spaces for the pots itself. And the little niche that you look at underneath would be for storing and stacking empty pots. And the little wall niches at the top called ala or alia would be to hang your pot rings, which really help you support the pots on your head when water is being fetched from a public source into the house. And you also see this little ledge here, which is meant to collect the excess water on the ledge itself into a little pot. So that excess water drain off can be collected and reused for something else. So there's a whole ecosystem around this whole the collection of water, to storage of water, to consumption of water, and it gives us an insight into a resource utilization in these parts of the country as well. And then in the Shekhawati region, we realized that there were large rooms being built for the purpose of storage of water. These were Havelis in the Shekhawati region, which were meant for families with a large number of people living together, at least about 30, 40 people living together in the same home. So it meant more water was required to be stored for the use of the family. So in these homes, these water storage spaces were called pendo. And in Rajasthan also, there were public spaces for the storage of water called pyavu. So on one of our journeys from Jodhpur to Pipar, we stopped at a pyavu like this, and we were told that these are maintained by the community around, where somebody volunteers to store water for public use. And they have a little sort of donation box, which is called the Dan Patra or the Dan Peti, where people can make a little contribution so that it can be used for the maintenance of these spaces. So this idea of storing water for use really extends from a small niche to a large public space. And we were also looking at sort of how materials influence the making of these objects. And in Rajasthan itself, while we were in the process of defining what these everyday furniture pieces could be called or how the material utilization occurs, we saw this water storage right at the entrance of another house. So if you look at it closely, it's really like a chicken coop made in quite modern materials of metal and mesh. But inside, there are water pots that are stored. And the ingenuity of it is that a little hole has been tapped under the water pots and connected to a tap. And it's really meant for people passing by on the streets. So you really begin to see a varied range of objects and storage systems for the storage of water across these areas. The second one that I want to get into is relating to women and crafting. And this here is a village in Barmer in Rajasthan. And the architecture, the form of the home is called a dhani, which consists of a cluster of spaces within a courtyard. And within one of these spaces, which is the kitchen space, Tari Devi, who is the lady of the house, she spoke to us about having made this piece of furniture, which is called a kotlio or a koto in some homes. And they are larders, sort of made to store everyday food that has been prepared to keep it fresh for the day, or dairy products like curd and yogurt and milk. And she spoke to us about having made this kotlio herself, which really gives again an insight into making practices. Often we encountered craftspeople from formal craft structures who were making objects and furniture with sort of strict rules in place. But on the other hand, we were also meeting people like Tari Devi who were making their own spaces and their own furniture. And she sort of laughed and made this comment about how these pieces would be made under the supervision of an older woman, often a mother or a mother-in-law. And she says if a younger person was being trained up in the process, you could really notice there would be different patches depending on the skill sets of the people making it. And Tari Devi mentioned about how women were crafting most of their objects in the kitchen space themselves. Similarly, in Jaisalmer, we met Prem Bai, who had painted her kotlio, this bright pink, mainly because she had some leftover distemper paint from one of her son's project, and she wanted to make it look colorful. And she spoke to us about the maintenance of these spaces and these objects. And here, while Tari Devi's kotlio was mud plastered, here in Jaisalmer it was lime plastered, but obviously Prem Bai had used distemper paint to sort of paint it. And she said they do this process every year during Diwali as a ritual of renewing their space and maintaining their objects. And Prem Bai also showed us the other storage furniture that she had crafted in her own kitchen. This is an inbuilt shelf, again made using a combination of locally available twigs and barks of trees and mud and lime plaster. And an admixture of clay and hay and dung would be used to sort of form the shape itself. And this is called a beel. And this shelf here at the far end is called a janeri, again used to stack vessels and utensils in the kitchen. So these women are crafting their entire space themselves and making these furniture pieces to be able to store and aid in their everyday kitchen activities. Before we sort of fall prey to this trope of women just crafting and being part of kitchen spaces, we were also in many parts where women are an active participant in most crafting practices. And here in Punjab, we met women the set of three neighbors, who were making rope out of locally growing grass, and they called it moonj ki rassi, which is the main economic generator for this entire village. And these women were making these ropes to obviously then be given off to other craftspeople who make other forms of furniture. And these sort of ropes are an integral component of furniture like charpais and mudhas, which I think most of us perhaps are familiar with. Talking about furniture pieces, one often looks at these pieces in isolation, particularly in contexts like museums. But while we were also going out to record, we were looking at these objects as individual types and individual objects themselves. But then what we soon began to realize was that furniture really aids an entire lifestyle and supports an entire lifestyle within a home. So this is a residence in Rajasthan, and when we walked into the house, we were made aware of these various types of inbuilt furniture pieces, like these wall cabinets called Ada. And even within these cabinets and Adas, there were nuances to it. The one that you look at in the corner is actually called a tangkhunia. And if you notice closely, you actually see that that's the only storage space which has a lock on it. And this elderly lady who was talking to us mentioned that that's where they would perhaps store some of their valuables, as it is quite common for women to save a little of their valuables and put little pots of money together in their spaces, which they access and use on an everyday basis. And the construction of this tankunya is formed in such a way that this is what we've been told as part of oral history recordings, that it's harder to break into if it's a corner. So, which is why they use that as the lockable space, whereas the other adas actually serve as storage spaces for the kitchen. And these ledges where the utensils are stacked are called tan. And and in Gujarat, they're called mand, where people essentially display their utensils. And often it's a subtle way of saying how many people they are able to host at any given point of time. So small sort of social nuances of understanding life in these parts. And then within the same home, you also see the panyara, and you also look at charpais and granaries used for storage of grains called koti and kablo. What's also interesting is in these series of images, if you look at it, their furniture and their everyday spaces are sort of painted in similar colors. And there's something to think about the aesthetics of a home and how these furniture pieces tie into that idea as well. And the fourth one that I want to talk about is this idea of furniture and memory. In Punjab and Haryana, we recorded this piece of furniture called sandook. Sandook is a term that most of us are quite familiar with and often refers to a storage furniture, but particularly in Punjab and Haryana, it sort of made a reference to these large storage cabinets, which we were told is an integral part of what's called the Daj. The Daj is a bridal trousseau which is given to the bride at the time of the wedding by her family. And it would include various other objects and furniture, like little low stools called pidhi, and it would also have a charkha, and it would also have handheld fans called pankha, and clothes and bedding and sweets to be taken to her new home. And this was quite ubiquitous across Punjab and Haryana, where we saw these large storage cabinets. And often families made a reference to it belonging to their mothers or their grandmothers. And it sort of was an indicator that these sort of furniture pieces are not as commonly made as they were before, but at one point they were very much an integral part of a married woman's life. Here are some images of sandook that we recorded across Punjab. And as I mentioned, often families stored these other objects that came with the Daj within these sandook. Here's a family showing us the objects that came as part of their mother's Daj. And it's a matter of pride for these families to show these sandook and the other objects, such that in some of the homes that we went, they were put out on display, like in their homes. So in this family, there were two women who'd been married into the family. So you see two different sandook that were displayed. So in Punjab and Haryana, also what you encounter is obviously the stories of migration and the stories of partition, and therefore memories associated with those events as well. So in Tarn Taran in Punjab, we visited a family who had this sandook, and they had been sort of they had to evacuate from their previous home and their previous village in the post-partition conflict period of the 60s and the 70s. And on one such occasion, while they were carrying and moving with the sandook of theirs, the leg had been damaged. And if you look closely at the leg, which is the furthest into the photograph here, you see that it's quite distinctly different from the rest of it. So for this family, they've intentionally kept this leg different because it is a reminder for them of these events of the partition and the post partition conflicts that communities and people have had to endure around these regions. This is another piece of furniture. This is Devi Lal and his family. And the manja in this part of Punjab, the charpais are called manja. And the manja actually belonged to his father's friend who had to migrate to Pakistan, to present-day Pakistan during the partition period, and he'd left behind this manja for Devilal's father to use as a reminder of their friendship. So for Devilal, it's not just a reminder of his father, but it's also a reminder of his father's friendship with people across the border. And this is another family in Punjab who had again migrated from present-day Pakistan to present-day Punjab in India. And they showed us this taki is what they called it, but essentially it is the door to a larder, which they called a taki, an inbuilt larder in their previous home. And this ornately sort of lacquered door is the first of its kind we recorded on this survey. So here I'd like to point out the ways in which a single object really leads us to understanding many and diverse aspects of cultural knowledge. So because this was the first time we had seen this sort of lacquer work in Punjab in India, it reminded us of a pidha that we have here in the collection, which has similar lacquer work. And this comes from Chinyot in Pakistan, which is where craftspeople who practice this sort of lacquerware are believed to be. So in a way, in Punjab, while we were recording objects that told us stories of one kind, there were also these absences because the story of Punjab and Haryana and material culture in this part can never be fully told without looking at what was divided and what now exists in present-day Pakistan. So even though there are these stories, it's just a part of the whole that we have been able to record, and hopefully we'll someday be able to bridge those gaps as well. And having encountered these lacquer furniture in Haryana, we met an artisan craftsperson who was practicing turnwood and lacquering, and he was the only craftsperson we met who was practicing this sort of lacquering. And when I say this sort of lacquering, it makes a reference to the kind of colors and the kind of turning that's used in the pieces of furniture as well. And he sort of was able to validate this further by saying that a lot of craftspeople who practice this are in present-day Pakistan. So I could go on and on about these sort of stories and individual pieces for every furniture piece and object that we recorded, and we'll all still be here. So without doing further delay, I'm going to jump into the rest of the aspects of the methodology. So after recording the stories, we were also looking at analyzing the various crafts. And for this, we were making field sketches and drawings and meeting with craftspeople who continue to make these furniture types. We were making measure drawings of the furniture pieces that we were recording. These are some of the field drawings that were made by the team. And these drawings were translated into Rhino, a three-dimensional modeling software, and that was further then moved on to exported onto into a drafting software called AutoCAD. And for the first time ever, we've been able to prepare measure drawings, detailed measure drawings of furniture pieces that we were recording. So this proves, I mean, this sort of serves as a record for conservationists, for other furniture makers to understand how the construction of these furniture pieces happens. And this was not just limited to the wooden examples that we recorded, but was done for all types of furniture that we studied. So in all, we were able to prepare 124 drawings of the different types of furniture we recorded. And then finally coming to how we were able to make this connection between the South Asia collection and the objects that we have here, and how this sort of informed the project. In the collection, we had something called a Banswara chest. This is how it was recorded in our records. And when we were conducting the research in Rajasthan, before we had gone into southern Rajasthan, we were trying to look at contacts, and we were trying to see how we could look at objects in that part of Rajasthan. And one of the clues that we had was Banswara chest. We hadn't recorded anything like this yet on the project at the time. And Banswara is the name of a village, a town in southern Rajasthan. And we thought, well, that's a clue to begin with. And we started looking for people who could lead us to contacts in Banswara. Luckily, at the time, we had a student at Sept University called Dharmesh. And Dharmesh said, oh, well, Banswara is quite close to where I live. I have my family there, and my uncles are all from a family of carpenters, traditional sutars. So he said, I could connect you to them, and maybe you could go have a look at them, look at what you might find there. So Dharmesh gave us the contact to his uncle, Mr. Jagdish Suthar, who you see in the image here. We landed up in Goari near Dungarpur, and he took us around these villages. And finally, we ended up at their family home, where he spoke to us about his father, who had been a suthar, a carpenter who had done a lot of work for the village. And not only had he practiced carpentry, but also had made furniture pieces for the family, one of which is now in Mr. Jagdish's home. And Mr. Jagdish himself is a carpenter, and he spoke to us about his own way of practicing the craft, showed us his tools, and so on. And then he eventually took us to his brother's home, where we found our first ever Banswara chest, as we were calling it. And this essentially is called a maju, which is a storage cabinet particular to the Wagad region, and more so particular to the Banswara and Dungarpur areas of Rajasthan. In Kharagda village, we went around with Mr. Jagdish from his home, 2 more homes, where we kept seeing one maju after the other, having not found one until then. And what we were stunned to realize was these maju were used as safe storages, because of which they were commissioned by the person who owned it to the village suthar. And at any given point of time, there were no 2 maju that were made alike, because it would be a collaboration between the owner and the maker. And it would be made with a complex mechanism of joinery systems, which would only open up if you knew how to open it up. And that knowledge only stayed between the owner and the carpenter who had made it. So at any given point of time, only 2 people knew how to open up each maju. And this, much like the object itself, the knowledge of opening up the maju would be then transferred from one generation to the other generation. Now, in the case of the Banswara chest and the maju, what happened was, because they were used as safe storages, obviously people were apprehensive to open it up for us to see how it was made, to understand the making of it. Now, this is where the collection was a huge resource for us. Having done this, we obviously were able to contextualize the piece in the collection. But further on, we were able to spend more time with the maju that we have in the collection. In 2018, my colleagues and myself, the former curator here, Ben, and one of my team members, Samrud, we had the opportunity to be at the collection at the same time. So we took the opportunity to analyze this maju in the collection. And we realized, although it may have been opened up in its previous life, after having moved to Norwich, it had never been opened up before. So as we set out to understand how this Maju could be opened, in a span of it took us about 5 to 6 hours. And we realized that eventually there were about 16 secret compartments, all openable by a complex system of joinery mechanism that was there. Unfortunately, we didn't find any treasures in it, but we were able to understand the making of a Maju. So that sort of helped bridge the gap that we faced during fieldwork. So having studied such extensive furniture pieces so extensively, we obviously wanted to ensure that this knowledge reaches the right place. And both organizations have always been of the ethical positioning that knowledge has to be disseminated and shared. So it was quite crucial for us to put together this knowledge into shareable formats. So all the mapping information and all the object-based information that we recorded during the identification locating phase of the projects were translated into these 4 catalogs, each for each region of Northwest India. And we put together a selection of about 400 pieces that sort of best represented furniture from each state. And these catalogs represent those information. So the catalogs really include images and a small little object-specific tab that talks about those specific pieces. The drawings that were produced were converted into portfolios, and these are A3 portfolios with spreads dedicated to each furniture type. And again, 4 portfolios for each of dedicated to each of the states. And all the oral history work, all the sort of academic and research-based work, including the stories and the narratives and the drawings and the images that we were able to take, went into 3 different books, one for Gujarat, one for Rajasthan, and another one for Punjab and Haryana, because when we were conducting field work, we realized that the stories of Punjab and Haryana could not be separated out. So we decided to make that into one book. So these books are formatted in such a way that there's an introduction section which talks about all the sort of learning stages of each phase of the project. And then the chunk of the books are dedicated to each type of furniture and all the oral history recording that we did as part of the project. And then it ends with concluding chapters looking at aspects of materials and making and change, because materials aren't really stagnated. Furniture have been evolving as materials have been changing as well. So the conclusion bits look at that. And then we also put together a website, which is an open access website, which gives out all the research that was documented. So except the books in the book formats, all the information of the project is available to be viewed on this website. We were also lucky enough to collaborate with Google Arts and Culture, so there's a bit of information on there as well. So having done this project, I just want to sort of conclude with some reflections on why this project has been an important one. One is its timely documentation, because lifestyles continue to change. 2, we obviously have been able to contextualize collections. And 3, it's been the creation of new knowledge. And it's the first ever research of this kind. On one hand, we can think of this as a thing to be proud of, but then on the other hand, we were critical about why this was the case. So while I'm concluding, I just want to briefly talk about why and how we learned about sort of this project being the first ever of its kind, and why so. And this is just a brief glimpse into a historical inquiry that we did. So when we were looking at previous research that existed on the subject, we were referring back to various types of material. And one of the things that we realized in early historical writing is that colonial documentation on India and material culture in India was looking at furniture through a lens which could not really identify what furniture in India looked like at the time. So many officers who are traveling in India at the time and documenting their narratives are writing in this manner. George Birdwood says, if you may judge from the great example of India, the great art in furniture is to do without it. And then Edward Terry is writing about, as per furniture, they have very little, for they have no chairs, no stools, nor couches, nor tables. And James Todd, who traveled extensively and considered one of the greatest writers of documenting Rajasthan, also says in their household economy, their furniture and decorations remain unchanged. And no chairs, no couches again. So this sort of cultural blindness is repeated in these writings, which then again lead into sort of post-independent cultural movements as well in terms of how museums and art history is looked at. But one of my favorite ones and one of our favorite discoveries was Edwin Lord Weeks writing and making his etchings in his book From the Black Sea Through Persia and India, makes an etching of a scene in Bikaner, a street scene, which the image of which you look on the left, and sort of the accompanying text looks at saying the people have a way of keeping what at first sight appears to be their dining tables in front of their houses or in the middle of the street. But what these dining tables really were is what we discovered when we visited Bikaner. There are these public benches put out in streets and squares for the use of people. The pata it's called a pata, and it can be owned by a group of people within the community. It can be owned by temple committees if they are placed outside temples, or they can be owned by the local panchayat, where local panch hearings would be sort of heard on sitting on the pata. And you see these pata dotted across the walled city of Bikaner, and it is very unique to the walled city of Bikaner. And then sometimes individual owners put it outside their homes for the use of public, where you also see notes like these where it's commissioned in the memory of someone. So what this project has been able to achieve is to actually not just create this new knowledge, but also dispel some of this historical writing about the lack of furniture in India and what these types of furniture could be. So the fact that we've been able to look at what Weeks drew, and this is a scene from Bikaner today. He says people are playing a game of chess on this dining table, whereas here people are playing a game of cards. So this was an amazing discovery for us as part of the project. And like I said, contextualizing collections, we have a number of benches like this in the South Asia collection. So we initially thought, wow, we've identified these as Pata from Bikaner. But unfortunately not, because when you actually think about it, when pieces are publicly owned or owned by a community, there is fewer chances of it actually making its way into a trade market. And that's when we had to reflect a bit more on other furniture pieces that we had recorded during the survey. And similar benches in the Shekhawati region, privately owned, are called takhat. And they were clearly more similar physically to the ones that we have in the collection. And also the fact that Shekhawati region as a whole has undergone that sort of phenomena of homes being emptied, woodwork and architectural elements being sold off into the export handicraft markets. The chances of privately owned takhat making its way into the collection is far more possible than the ones from Bikaner. So even within those different types, there are nuances of how we've been able to contextualize the collection. And we've been able to obviously share these stories in our museum space as well, where we currently have an exhibition ongoing about the project. To quickly run through, these are some of the other objects that we've been able to contextualize in the collection. This is a pidhi. And not just furniture directly, but we've also been able to contextualize some of these other forms of material culture. These two window frames, part of architectural features, have similar carvings to the kind on the Maju on the right here. So we've been able to establish that they come from the same place. And that, again, was a conclusion from some of the architectural features we recorded during fieldwork. So the different ways in which we've been able to piece together cues on establishing provenance as well. Again, other forms of art historical material. We have an album of watercolors from the 1800s in the collection, which was put together by a French Jesuit missionary traveler in Rajasthan. And this album of watercolors actually shows scenes of rituals associated with marriage and death. And the entire album is dotted with representations of furniture. Again, giving us an insight into how there was furniture in the 1800s, but people who were traveling around just didn't recognize them as being furniture and just has been left out of the discourse. But again, one of our favorite ones is this object called a toran. We saw these torans at the entrance of doorways in the Shekhawati Havelis. And we were often told that it's an object used in wedding rituals. But we obviously didn't get to witness it. We were relying on oral history. But this album here actually represents this exact scene where the bridegroom is invited to sort of touch this toran at the entrance of a home. So the interconnections between objects, between the fieldwork, and again, between other forms of art history material has been a great way to understand how connections can be made between fieldwork and collection objects. Which really just brings me to the end of the talk today. I know I've probably run a bit over time. But for us, the greatest win on this project and the greatest achievement that we would like to take back is how this project hopes to create value for people who actually make and use them. I want to end with an anecdote here. When we were finishing up the project in 2020 and 2020, in sort of 2019 and 2020, just before the pandemic hit, and we were finishing fieldwork in Punjab, on using one of our social media posts, a young person called Arvinderjit got in touch with us from Punjab and told us about this sandook they had in their old family home, which was not being lived in. And he said, it's in a bad shape. Could I have more information about it? I really want to do something with it. Having sort of spoken to the team, he was able to connect with local craftspeople and he was able to get some repairs made. And here you can see him moving the sandook to his new home where they all live. So there is a sense of pride that he was able to carry back with him. The sandook belonged to his grandmother, so he was quite happy about having been able to take it back to his own space now. So the hope of this project really has been to instill this sense of value within communities who actually make and use these furniture pieces. But the larger hope is also that furniture can be recognized as an integral part of cultural heritage in India, much like other forms of cultural heritage like textiles and architecture, and that this new knowledge can be celebrated and that we can all take pride in our everyday objects. So I'll leave you with that thought and thank you. I would really like to thank MAP because I think platforms like this will help further this knowledge that we've been able to generate over the past 8 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mansi. Such an incredible project. I think it's quite exhaustive. And thank you so much for sharing so many of these incredible stories with us. And also, I think it's very important to sort of hear about the methodology and the ways of documentation. So I'm sure that was quite insightful for a lot of us. We are slightly over time, but we already have a bunch of questions, so we can get started quickly. So Elena Herrero has a comment that I noticed a red chair portrait at the beginning of the presentation, which is strikingly similar to a type of Spanish traditional chair used by our gypsy communities. believe that might be the Romanis. Um, and the double version of which was used, as far as I know, in marriages, red and gold painted mostly. Since our gypsies originated from the Indo Valley, would an analogy be possible?
Um, well, that is really a very interesting comment. And I think during the course of the research, we have encountered examples where furniture pieces do transcend global borders as well. And obviously, I think I made a comment in one of my slides about culture not being an island. So there's definitely possibilities that there are analogies that can be drawn. And I do remember when I was at SOAS, I had a professor who was from Greece, and when I shared this research with her, she spoke to me about how similar charpai legs have been found in Greece, and of course, there's the connection with the Persian furniture in Iran as well. So I'm pretty sure there are overlaps, but this isn't a study that we've delved into in detail ourselves. But like I said, the project really hopes for further research to be generated. So it's definitely something that we'd be keen to hear more about.
Thank you. Another question is, are there specific ways in which people take care of these vernacular furniture, especially wooden ones in remote villages?
So, wooden pieces were really fascinating for us because there were different ways of maintaining it. Uh, if you noticed, a lot of the wooden furniture was actually painted. So, the way people have started sort of maintaining them, as they call it, is there's a tradition among sort of predominantly Hindu families. They, at the time of Diwali, they practice this whole idea of cleansing the house, cleaning up the home, and there's a paint coat that's applied on the walls. But at the same time, they also sort of end up painting these wooden elements in the house, including doorways and window frames and the furniture as well. And often it tends to be in the same color. So there's that element of aesthetics that play into it. So that was one way of what was called maintaining. But also, like for example, when you look at furniture pieces like the charpai or the pidha or the pidi, which have webbing, the legs are often looked after in ways that they can at home. But when the webbing is worn out, they just buy new. These days, it's mostly cotton and nylon straps that are available in the local market, and they sort of web the seats themselves. So often it was a practice to buy these legs from the sutars or from the local markets, and then families would sort of create the seats and the webbing surfaces themselves. So there's quite an interesting way of working with traditional carpenters who are around, but also looking after these pieces themselves. But there was no sort of technical maintenance as such in what we would call conservation standards or any of that. It was just how people wanted to look after their objects.
Thank you. Would you be able to comment a little bit on stories you might have encountered on the Hitchco or other traditional swings?
The Hitchco in obviously comes from Gujarat, and an interesting story that I can comment on is a lot of Hitchco that you see in Gujarat have ceramic tiles as adornments on them. And I think one of the common understandings is that Hitchco, used to swinging because of, again, climatic regions, sort of is enabling air movement around you. So you do see it particularly in the hotter parts of Northwest India. Now, the Hitchco actually resembles a bench, and the bench itself is called a bankdo in Gujarat, which is derived from the Portuguese term bank, which is meant to be the church benches that was introduced into parts around Surat, etc. And then the Hitchco takes on that form in terms of design. The interesting anecdote I did want to mention is that these ceramic tiles that are used as adornments on on these Hitchco actually again have a connection with international global trade, because in the 20s the ceramic tiles were introduced into India through Japanese tile making. And in some places where we were able to look at the back of these tiles on the Hitchco, the tile itself had this sort of embossing from the mold which said "Made in Japan." So it's a funny thing, because the tiles, they might not have been made in Japan. The molds might have been sent over, and it might have been made in India. But again, some of these stories about global connections, about how these ceramic tiles have become sort of an identity to these Hitchco that are used. So that's maybe one anecdote that I do remember from that.
We have several questions on the chat, but unfortunately, we won't be able to take all of them. But I'll quickly read the next one. Did you identify building methods and raw materials used, joinery, glues, types of wood, etc.? Also, what about tools that were used? I guess most of these would have been handmade, and the tools as well would have been local. This would be a great information for restorers.
Yes, we were able to record wherever information was available, and all this is part of the narratives in the books, which hopefully we'll be able to share more, because uh, the books are available to buy, and a lot of this information is also available on our website, and we'll hopefully be doing more with Map Academy as well, so the knowledge will be accessible further. But yes, the tools have been recorded. We were able to meet with craftspeople, so the joinery systems, which obviously reflect in the drawings. For people who want to access the drawings, it's an open source. It's available for download on the website, so you'll be able to look at the drawings in detail as well. And the local terminologies and the local materials are all referenced in the books with each furniture type.
I'm just compiling two questions here. So, could you speak briefly about how participants felt about their spaces being photographed or documented? And another question is about obstacles you might have faced during curation and public reaction to the curation itself.
The first one, we were pleasantly surprised that most people were amazingly welcoming, and they were so keen to share stories about their everyday objects, because I think we all take for granted what we own in our homes. And when suddenly there's someone interested in these objects, there is a sense of pride that comes in. So, that said, we did obviously have one or two instances where we were told to leave. We were asked to not document, and sometimes the women were really welcoming. Another point to note is that there are some parts of the house that uh, were definitely gendered. So some of the areas where women predominantly occupied space, the men on the team weren't allowed in. So we always sort of factored that in while we were traveling as well. So I do remember one instance where the women of the house had let us in and had said we were free to document, but then her husband came in and he said, definitely no, please leave and please delete the images, which we respected, obviously. And but I think those sort of instances have just very, very few. We were really welcomed. And I think that's what we all treasure in the project, the amount of experiences that we've been able to share with the people. So, and with the curation, I think I did briefly mention some of the challenges with the example of the pata. I think often it is about establishing identification for these objects. That said, the other challenge is obviously sometimes you have space constraints of display. So some of the larger pieces you can't really weave into the narrative, but they form a larger part of our space, of our permanent displays itself. But that said, not really. I think I found my position on this project quite unique, having worked on the fieldwork part of it and now being able to see the afterlife of the project in the representation of these objects. In fact, I find it really enriching rather than challenging or limiting.
Another question is about examples of contemporary furniture designs that makers or users have adapted or modified. based on more traditional typologies or forms that you might have observed?
I think there's a lot of designers who are looking back at craft traditions. Um, I haven't personally delved deep into this, but I can definitely point out Sarita Sundar's work, From the Frugal to the Ornate, is another book which is amazingly written and studied and researched on furniture, on particularly the seat in India. And she does make a reference to contemporary designers working in the space who look at uh, traditional forms as well. So I think that's a source to look at.
I'll just take one last question and we can wrap up with that. So sorry to the rest of you in case I've missed out a few questions. The question is, I would like to know more about the extremely ornamental doors that can be found in the Havelis of Churu. Many cases adorned with different motifs like sun or birds or trees. Is there any cultural connotations that we can connect with these doors particularly?
Um, yes, there are. Each motif has a reference to belief systems in the region. That said, we've also encountered scenarios where it's sometimes just the aesthetic interests of the artisan making it and the owner commissioning it as well. So I can't say much for Churu because I speak only from the primary research we've been able to conduct, but definitely in the Wagad region where the Maju were made, we were told about how it's a sort of synchronous relationship between the owner um, of the home and the traditional suthar. So the village would have one or two suthars who would take up most of the work. And often the architecture and the furniture are crafted by the same woodworkers. So there would also be overlaps between the patterns and iconography between architectural elements and furniture pieces. So, but I can't comment directly on specific patterns and specific motifs because that, while we've studied some elements of it in the project, we haven't really dealt with it specifically in Churu. So but also to bear in mind that the Shekhawati region was a confluence of influences coming in from the trade merchants who were traveling across the world at the time. So they were really patrons of the arts and crafts in the region. So there would have been influences not just locally from within the community, but also looking at what was happening around. So I think that's one thing to bear in mind.